Welcome back
Welcome
to
to the
Foundations
Think
in
Forward
Foresight, a
podcast,
Think
where we
Forward
speak
series.
with futurists,
I'm Steve
innovators,
Fisher,
and
today
big thinkers.
we're venturing
Come
into
along with your
territory
host,
that many
Steve
futurists
Fisher,
and
and
organizations
explore the
tend to
future
avoid.
together.
The darker sides of our potential futures. It's human nature to focus on positive possibilities. We love exploring scenarios where technology solves major problems, where societies become more just and sustainable, and where opportunities expand. That optimistic vision is important and valuable. But if we exclusively focus on preferred futures while avoiding the challenging ones, we create dangerous blind spots in our foresight practice. Today, we're going to talk about why exploring dystopian possibilities isn't just an exercise in pessimism. It's a crucial component of comprehensive and responsible futures thinking. We'll discuss how to navigate these darker futures with balance and purpose, how to build psychological resilience when facing challenging scenarios, and how to turn these explorations into strategic advantage rather than sources of paralysis or fear. By the end of this episode, you'll have practical approaches for incorporating dystopian scenario thinking into your foresight practice in ways that strengthen rather than weaken your preparedness for whatever lies ahead. Why we avoid the darker futures. Let's start by acknowledging something important. Most of us naturally resist thinking about negative futures. There are several understandable reasons for this. Psychological discomfort. Contemplating negative possibilities can be emotionally taxing. It triggers anxiety and uncertainty, which our brains are wired to avoid. Professional incentives. In organizational settings, bearers of bad news or uncomfortable possibilities often face resistance. Executives, stakeholders, and teams typically prefer optimistic narratives that align with growth and success. Accusations of pessimism. Those who raise challenging scenarios may be labeled as negative thinkers or accused of lacking vision or dampening motivation. The optimism bias. Humans have a well-documented tendency to overestimate positive outcomes and underestimate risks, especially for outcomes over which we feel some control. These natural tendencies create what I call strategic blind spots, areas of potential future development that remain unexplored simply because they're uncomfortable to consider. And these blind spots can be dangerous. When the COVID-19 pandemic emerged in early 2020, many organizations were caught completely unprepared, despite the fact that global pandemics had been identified as a significant risk for decades. The scenario was well understood by epidemiologists, but most companies and governments avoided deep engagement with this darker future until it became reality. This illustrates a crucial point. Avoiding exploration of challenging futures doesn't prevent them from happening. It just ensures we're unprepared when they do. The strategic value of dark futures thinking. So what's the actual value of exploring these more challenging scenarios? Why should we deliberately venture into these uncomfortable territories? Enhanced resilience. Understanding potential threats and challenges allows you to build appropriate buffers, contingency plans, and adaptive capabilities. Organizations that regularly explore darker futures tend to recover more quickly from disruption because they've already thought through potential responses. Identification of early warning signals. When you've explored challenging scenarios in depth, you become much better at recognizing early indicators that such scenarios might be developing. This gives you precious time to prepare or even help prevent negative outcomes. Discovery of unexpected opportunities. Sometimes, exploring dystopian scenarios reveals surprising opportunities, ways to provide solutions to emerging problems, or niches that might open up as systems evolve in challenging directions. More robust strategy development. Strategies tested against both positive and negative scenarios tend to be more resilient and adaptable than those designed only for preferred futures. Ethical responsibility. For those whose work influences major decisions, there's an ethical dimension to considering potential negative impacts and unintended consequences of various paths forward. The goal isn't to become pessimistic or fearful, but rather to develop what I call clear-eyed optimism, a perspective that acknowledges challenges and risks, while maintaining the agency to address them effectively, balancing darkness and light in scenario development. The key to effective dark futures thinking isn't to replace optimistic scenarios with pessimistic ones. It's to develop a balanced portfolio of futures that encompasses multiple possibilities. In traditional scenario planning, practitioners often talk about creating a cone of possibility that includes probable, plausible, and possible futures. Within this approach, you can deliberately ensure that your scenarios include both challenging and opportunistic versions. Here's a practical approach to develop balanced scenario sets. 1. Create scenario pairs that explore similar drivers of change but with different outcomes. For example, if exploring the future of AI, develop both a scenario where AI augments human capabilities and strengthens social systems, positive, and one where AI deepens inequality and undermines social cohesion, challenging. This method ensures you're not simply selecting preferred drivers, but rather exploring the full range of potential outcomes for key uncertainties. 2. Use the shadow scenario technique. After developing your primary scenarios, deliberately create a shadow version of each that asks, what if this scenario unfolded in ways we're not considering or that contradict our assumptions? This helps uncover blind spots in even well-developed scenario sets. 3. Employ the pre-mortem approach. Originally developed by psychologist Gary Klein, a pre-mortem asks participants to imagine that a project or strategy has failed, then work backward to determine what could have caused this failure. This technique can be adapted for scenario work by asking, imagine it's 5 years from now, and our organization has been severely disrupted. What happened? 5. Map consequences across stakeholders. For each scenario, map out how different stakeholders would be affected. This approach helps identify potential harms that might otherwise be overlooked when considering only aggregate outcomes. The goal in all these approaches is not to indulge in doom scrolling or catastrophizing, but rather to systematically explore the full range of possibilities in a way that enhances your strategic preparation. Building psychological resilience when exploring dark futures. While there's clear strategic value in exploring challenging futures, we need to acknowledge the emotional and psychological aspects of this work. How do we engage with potentially disturbing scenarios without becoming overwhelmed, fearful, or paralyzed? Here are practical approaches for building psychological resilience in darker futures exploration. 1. Frame exploration as preparation, not prediction. Language matters. When introducing darker scenarios, emphasize that you're exploring possibilities to be better prepared, not predicting inevitable outcomes. This simple framing shift can significantly reduce anxiety and resistance. 2. Focus on agency and response. Always pair exploration of challenging scenarios with discussion of potential responses. What could we do now to prevent this outcome? How might we respond if early signals of this scenario begin to appear? Focusing on agency transforms fear into purposeful action. 3. Use temporal distancing. Research in psychological distance shows that considering challenging events from a more distant perspective reduces immediate anxiety. Try framing explorations as if we were looking back from 2040. What would we have wanted to prepare for? This creates enough psychological space to engage more objectively. 4th, practice futures self-regulation. Develop techniques to manage emotional responses during futures work. This might include setting time boundaries for engaging with challenging scenarios, pairing dark and light futures exploration in the same session, or using structured debriefing to process reactions. 5. Build futures thinking communities. Exploring challenging futures is easier and more productive in a supportive community. Create spaces where people can share concerns, reactions, and insights about difficult scenarios without judgment. Remember that the goal isn't to eliminate emotional responses. They're valuable signals that help us understand what matters. The aim is to develop the capacity to work productively with these emotions rather than being overwhelmed by them. From dark futures to strategic resilience. Now, let's talk about the most important part: how to convert these explorations into practical strategic advantage. After all, the purpose isn't just to imagine challenging futures, but to use those insights to build greater resilience and adaptability. Here's a structured approach to transform dark futures exploration into strategic resilience. 1. Identify key vulnerabilities and stress points. For each challenging scenario, systematically identify where your organization, community, or personal situation would be most vulnerable. Would supply chains break down? Would trust erode? Would particular skills become obsolete? This vulnerability mapping highlights where resilience-building efforts should focus. 2. Develop early warning systems. For each key vulnerability, identify the signals that might indicate movement toward that challenging future. What metrics, events, or trends would suggest this scenario is becoming more likely? Create a monitoring system for these signals, assigning responsibility for tracking them over time. 3. Build adaptability into current strategies. Use insights from dark futures to stress test existing strategies and plans. How would your 5-year plan perform if a challenging scenario began to unfold? Where would it break down? This analysis helps identify opportunities to build in greater flexibility and adaptability. 4. Create option value through strategic experiments. Develop small-scale experiments or pilot projects that could quickly scale if needed to address emerging challenges. These create option value, the ability to respond rapidly to changing conditions without committing massive resources prematurely. 5. Design contingency plans for key risks. For the most significant vulnerabilities identified, develop specific contingency plans. What would you do if a particular challenging scenario began to materialize? Having these plans in place reduces response time and improves effectiveness when quick action is needed. 6. Identify positive opportunities within challenging scenarios. Even in difficult futures, there are opportunities to create value and positive impact. What needs would emerge in these scenarios? What solutions might be in high demand? Identifying these opportunities shifts the mindset from pure defense to proactive adaptation. This approach transforms dark futures thinking from a potentially depressing exercise into a powerful strategic advantage. It's not about prediction. It's about preparation. Case study: navigating dark futures in practice. Let me share a brief case study that illustrates these principles in action. A few years ago, I worked with a global supply chain organization that had built its entire strategy around continued globalization, stable international relations, and ever-increasing efficiency through just-in-time logistics. When we introduced a deglobalization scenario featuring trade conflicts, nationalistic policies, and fragmented markets, there was significant resistance. This dark future contradicted their fundamental assumptions and threatened their core business model. Rather than avoiding this uncomfortable scenario, we used a structured approach to explore it productively. We framed it as a stress test for resilience, not a prediction. We systematically mapped vulnerabilities across their operations, customer relationships, and business model. We identified early warning signals that would indicate movement toward this challenging future. We developed contingency options, including regional supply network designs that could be implemented if needed. We explored potential opportunities within this scenario, including new services focused on supply chain resilience rather than just efficiency. Just 18 months later, when global trade tensions escalated and then COVID-19 disrupted global supply chains, this organization was far better prepared than competitors. Their early warning system gave them a 3-month head start in adapting, and they had already designed regional network alternatives that could be quickly implemented. What had initially seemed like a depressing and unlikely scenario became the foundation for strategic adaptation that preserved both business continuity and jobs during a major disruption. This illustrates the core principle. Exploring dark futures isn't about pessimism, it's about preparation that creates resilience and agility, whatever the future brings. Practical exercise, your dark futures toolkit. Let's conclude with a practical exercise to help you incorporate dark futures thinking into your own foresight practice. Here's a simple toolkit you can use. 1. The what could go wrong template. For any major strategy, decision, or trend you're tracking, ask these structured questions. What assumptions are we making that might prove false? Who might be negatively impacted if this trend accelerates? What systems or capabilities could be disrupted or rendered obsolete? What new vulnerabilities might emerge that don't exist today? What cascading effects might result from these disruptions? 2. The cross-impact matrix. Create a simple matrix with your key strategic assets or capabilities on one axis and potential disruptive forces on the other. For each intersection, assess the potential impact and your current preparedness. This quickly identifies your most significant vulnerabilities and priorities for resilience building. 3. The 3 horizons of risk. Adapted from the 3 horizons foresight framework, map risks across 3 timeframes. Horizon 1, 0 to 2 years. Immediate risks requiring tactical responses. Horizon 2, 2 to 5 years. Emerging risks requiring capability development. Horizon 3, 5 to 10 plus years. Long-term risks requiring strategic repositioning. This approach helps prioritize responses while ensuring attention to both immediate and long-term challenges. 4. The signal tracking dashboard. Create a simple dashboard of early warning signals for key risks you've identified. For each signal, define thresholds for increased monitoring or action. Review this dashboard regularly as part of your strategic planning process. These 4 tools provide a practical starting point for incorporating dark futures thinking into your regular foresight practice. They're designed to be straightforward enough to use regularly, but structured enough to yield valuable insights. Final thoughts in your challenge. Exploring darker futures isn't about becoming pessimistic or fearful. It's about developing the full spectrum vision needed to navigate an uncertain world with confidence and preparedness. The most resilient organizations, communities, and individuals aren't those who avoid considering challenges. They're those who face them directly and prepare accordingly. As futurist James Cascio wisely noted, optimism is a strategic position. True strategic optimism isn't blind to difficulties. It acknowledges them and builds the capabilities needed to overcome them. Here's my challenge to you. This week, identify one important area of your work or life where you might have a strategic blind spot regarding potential challenges. Apply the "what could go wrong" template we discussed. Then, identify at least one concrete action you could take now to build greater resilience in this area. Share your insights with a colleague or friend if possible. Remember, developing comfort with darker futures exploration is like building any other muscle. It strengthens with practice and benefits from supportive community. In our next episode, we'll explore how to craft compelling future narratives for change. The art of translating foresight insights into stories that inspire action and build momentum for preferred futures. Until then, keep exploring the full spectrum of possibilities, build your resilience muscles, and as always, think forward.
Thanks for listening to the Think Forward podcast. You can find us on all the major podcast platforms and at www.thinkforwardshow.com, as well as on YouTube under Think Forward Show. See you next time.